Now, pretty much any way bass are biting is the way that I like to catch them. But if there is one lure category or one technique that I am really passionate about, it's topwater fishing.
What was it all for? I don't know you anymore. We go back, we go back, we colliding. Losing track, even God knows I'm trying. Selfish ways to love me more these days. We go back, we go back, we colliding.
This video is brought to you by sportsmansoutfitters.com. Whether you're looking for topwater baits, swim baits, jigs, chatterbaits, no matter what tackle you're looking for, you can find the best prices at sportsmansoutfitters.com. Not only that, right now, if you use the coupon code BFHQ, you can actually save 10% off of any ARC fishing rod. So if you're on the market for a new rod, check out Sportsman's Outfitters, save 10%, and you're greatly gonna help support the Bass Fishing HQ channel. We all know that topwater fishing is super fun, but there are a lot of different types of topwaters on the market. I mean, we have walking baits, we have poppers, we have ploppers, we have buzz baits, we have toad style baits, frog style baits, wake baits, we have prop baits. There are just a ton of different topwaters. And a question that I get asked often on this channel is, when do you decide to go with one topwater over another? And so in today's video, that's what I want to break down. I want to talk about each style of topwater and when I like to throw it. But before we start talking about all the different topwater baits, I just want you to know that there are times when you're out there fishing that it doesn't matter what topwater bait you throw. There are just situations, there are times of the day, there are times of the year where it doesn't matter if you're throwing a popper, a plopper, a walking bait, the bass are gonna hit it, and it doesn't matter which one you throw. But there are certain situations, certain types of cover that I prefer some topwaters over another. So let's talk about walking baits right now. Now, a walking bait or a spook style bait like the one that I'm holding right here is probably one of the most popular topwaters. It's the one that I probably fish the most, and it's most well known for the way that it can just walk the dog back and forth. This topwater to me is what I call my open water topwater. Anytime that I'm fishing open water situations, that is when I pick up this walking bait. And what I mean by open water is just when I'm fishing, you know, off the bank. I'm not casting towards the bank, I'm fishing off the bank. So it might be a large grass flat area, or it might be out in the middle of a pond if you're fishing a pond. Or maybe I am fishing this bait across a big point, or maybe even some offshore brush piles that I'm trying to draw fish out of. Anytime I'm fishing in open water situations, that is when I pick up this bait. I typically want pretty clear water when I'm fishing a walking bait. You can fish it in off color and muddy water, and typically when I do that, I am throwing it closer to the bank, but I pick this bait up more times than not when I'm fishing those open water, clear water situations. Now, something I think a lot of guys get wrong about a spook style bait is thinking that bass are only gonna bite it in low light conditions. And there are times of the year where they only will bite it in low light conditions, but a lot of times, even in the heat of the summer, I will throw this bait in the middle of the day and be able to catch a lot of fish on it. So don't think that this is just a low light condition bait, or topwaters in general or low light conditions bait. You can catch them when the sun comes up. Now, the popper style bait is again one of my favorites, and I'm probably going to say that all of these are my favorite, and it's just because I love topwater fishing so much. But you know, something that's really nice about these popper style baits is you can work them really slow, and you can also work them really fast, and you can catch bass both ways. Now, typically, when I fish a popper, I am actually fishing it not in open water. I am actually fishing it against the bank. Maybe I am target casting around docks or around stumps, or maybe around little grass patches that I can visibly see. Anytime I want that bait to kind of hang out in an area for a long time, that is when I'm going to pick up a popper. Although I primarily target fish with these baits, I will throw them in the same areas that I throw that spook style bait. Now, I typically start with a spook, but if the bass are actually missing a spook, if you have a lot of fish come up there and hit that bait and miss it, that a lot of times is when I'm going to pick up a popper and fish it in those exact same areas. Because this bait is a little bit smaller, and when you pause it, it actually sits tail down like this in the water, you will get a lot of those fish that are missing the spook on a popper. Now, the other time that I will fish this over a spook is if I'm fishing around bass that are eating really small bait fish. You see this a lot in late summer, early fall. A lot of the young of the year bait fish like bluegill and shad are all over the place. That is a time when I'm gonna pick up this popper over any other topwater bait. Now let's talk about ploppers. You know, when this bait came out, there was no bad place to fish this thing. You could fish it anywhere and you would catch a ton of bass, and you would catch a lot of big bass. And the big reason is that a plopper has a very distinctive plopping sound, a very distinctive plopping noise, and the bass had never heard anything like that. And they absolutely tore that bait up for a long time. You could go to pretty much any lake, river, reservoir, it didn't matter, and you would catch fish on a plopper. But now a lot of people have caught on to fishing a plopper, and it has just become kind of another topwater bait that I use in certain situations. Now for me, I consider the plopper to be kind of a bank oriented bait. I like to fish it, you know, when I'm fishing long sections of bank that I don't know where the bass are. Maybe this is a really long rocky section of bank where the bass could be kind of anywhere. You know, a plopper, you can cover a ton of water with that bait, and you can kind of figure out the small sections where those bass are. And if there happens to be a laydown somewhere along that rock stretch or a patch of grass or whatever it may be, you can just continue to throw that plopper right beside it. Now, although you used to be able to catch bass on the plopper pretty much anywhere, now I really like to have a little bit of wind kind of blowing into that area. If there's a little bit of chop on the surface of the water, that seems to be when the plopper really excels, because it's a very noisy bait. It can draw those fish in when you have those windier conditions. Now let's talk about the buzzbait. And the buzzbait to me has a couple of really specific situations that it excels in. And the first one is gonna be warm, off color to muddy water. If you're gonna catch bass in muddy water on a topwater, this is the bait that you're going to catch them on. Something else that a buzzbait really excels around is wood cover, because you can bring this thing right over wood cover, wood pilings, laydowns, standing timber, and it's not going to get hung up, where some of these other baits with treble hooks will get hung up. So if you're fishing around muddy or off-color water that is warm, where you have a lot of wood, that is where I like a buzzbait. Now, in those situations, it does seem like you want lower light conditions, whether that is fishing it early in the morning, late at night, or even shade pockets or a cloudy day. That is when I love to fish a buzzbait. Now, the other situation where a buzzbait will outperform the rest of these baits is in cold water. I have caught bass on buzzbaits. I've said it a million times on this channel, but I've caught fish on buzzbaits in 47-degree water temperatures. And if you're fishing between 47 and 55 degrees, a lot of guys are not thinking about picking up a topwater, and a buzzbait will catch some of the biggest bass in that water temperature. It's unbelievable. You won't get a ton of bites, but the ones that you get will be gargantuan. So do not sleep on a buzzbait in cold water. Now, the next topwater is a prop bait. You know, this is gonna be a bait like a devil's horse. You know, these became extremely popular in lakes down in Florida, but people use them all across the country. Now, a prop bait to me is a spawning lure. If the bass are spawning or the bluegill are spawning, this is the bait that you want to pick up. There's just something about the noise that this bait makes and how you can pause it and it just sits still that absolutely drives a bass crazy when it is on a bed. And also when you're fishing around bluegill beds, this is my first bait that I'm going to pick up a lot. It really mimics a bluegill well, and you can kind of fish it on the outsides of a bluegill bed and catch a lot of bass. So anytime you're fishing around the bluegill spawn or bass spawn, pick up that prop bait. The next topwater is wake baits, and wake baits to me, out of all these baits, are the one that I have probably the least experience with. This is something that I really want to start dialing in over the next year or two, because I know that there are situations where a bass will eat a wake bait when they will not hit anything else. My first experience with a wake bait was actually when I was like 15 or 16 years old, and me and my best friend were fishing a pond. And this particular pond, if you would catch like 2 fish in 2 or 3 hours, that was a pretty good day. Like, it wasn't really easy to catch fish in this pond. But I remember this one 4th of July evening, we were actually getting ready to go to a cookout, and my buddy picked up a jointed wake bait and he was fishing it in this pond, and in 25 minutes he caught 9 bass on this. And I can remember it to this day because we were blown away by this. We had thrown poppers and Cincos of all things and just weren't catching a lot of fish. And he picks up this jointed wake bait and absolutely mauled the bass on it. Now, the big thing that I found with the wake bait is that you want calm water. In really, really calm water, it seems like this wake bait just has a tremendous drawing power, where those fish will come from 15 or 20 feet away to eat that bait. Now, typically, again, with this bait, I want clear water. A lot of top waters, I like clear water, but definitely with a wake bait. Now, the next bait is a toad style bait. And when I talk about fishing a toad, I'm talking about fishing just the toad. I'm not talking about threading this onto a buzz bait and fishing it that way. I'm talking about fishing just the toad. Now, there are some obvious situations that a toad excels. I mean, if you're fishing around shallow vegetation, lily pads, reeds, grass, I mean, this thing will come through anything and it can trigger some really big bites. But another situation that I really like this bait, where a lot of guys don't pick it up, is actually in really late summer. If you're fishing in late summer, those bass have just seen so many different baits. They've seen every single topwater bait that you own, and throwing a frog in some of those same situations, this is just a very subtle lure, especially the Zoom horny toad. You know, when it comes across the water, it doesn't have a tremendous commotion. It's just very subtle. And sometimes in late summer, when those bass have been beat up, this bait will really excel. You can fish it around shallow water vegetation, but you can also fish it around shallow rock cover and shallow wood cover. So in that late summer, you know, September, this is a bait that I throw a lot in that month. Now, the last topwater I'm going to talk about is a frog, and I am sure that I missed some other topwater baits that I'm just not thinking about. But to me, the frog obviously is going to excel when you're fishing it around matted vegetation or slop. This is probably the #1 reason that we all pick up a frog, whether that's slop in a pond or on a big lake. You know, you can fish this bait over that mat, and those fish are going to come through that mat to get this bait. Now, the other situation that I like a frog in is when I just need to skip a bait, whether I'm skipping it underneath of a dock or maybe under overhanging trees and I'm fishing those small shade pockets. That is where a frog excels. Now, the bad thing about frogs is that you can lose a lot of fish on them. And it's extremely frustrating for a bass to just come up there and smoke that thing, and either you miss them or you get them for a split second and he pulls off. It's so frustrating. And I actually kind of made a full video kind of that addresses a lot of the mistakes guys make with frogs and how you can start hooking up with more fish. I'm gonna leave that linked for you guys right here. So check out that video. I think you'll enjoy it. Also, don't forget to check out Sportsman's Outfitters, and I'll see you guys in the next video.